Hello there, welcome back to another Language Professora episode. In today's video, we are winding down with our grade 7 literature text, Man from Jamaica's Hills. We are now at chapter 9. So after this one, we have just one more chapter to go. Chapter 9 is all about Frank's travels. So let's take a look and see what's going on here. I must point out that there's not going to be much of conflict, climax, and resolution in this chapter. So it's more like a description or a narrative, right? There's no real problem to be solved, the suspense, and then the climax and the resolution of the problem. We don't have that happening in this chapter. Let's take a look. So the chapter opens with Frank and Tobal. If you remember who Tobal is, you can put a comment. Frank and Tobal are talking about Frank's plans to leave Jamaica for a little while because he wants to make a better living elsewhere. So, as per usual, we know that Frank is short on money, and this is his new plan to leave the island. He's thinking about going to Cayman. If you do a little bit of digging into Jamaica's history, you will realize that there was a point in time where a lot of persons who were looking for a better existence elsewhere, migration was the best option. And Cayman is a small island close to Jamaica that was one of the prime destinations for migration, especially migration for work. So Frank is thinking about going to Cayman. Tobal, of course, reminds him that you're not a single person. You have Alice and the baby to consider. And he asks Frank, what will Alice say about it? And Frank's response was along the lines of, Alice has no say really. So his plan is to send her and the baby back to the country to Alice's father. Do you remember who Alice's father is, by the way? Let's see if you remember that. So his plan is to send them back to the country to her father. Tobal, of course, is trying to, get him to see that he needs to talk to Alice about it. He can't just make a decision for her. And Frank is not taking lightly or kindly to that remark. He goes home. He does not consult Alice as Tobal had suggested and simply informs her of what he plans to do. And even though she is a little bit objective to it in terms of she's not wanting to go along with that, Frank being Frank, his decision stands and he tells her that this is what is going to be happening. Of course, being the smooth talker that he is, he convinces her that going away is the best option because he'll get the chance to work, make some money, make a living for them, and when he comes back, things will be better for them. He tells her that he will visit her before he leaves and that she's going back to the country to her father alone because he's not sure if her father is still upset with him about whatever happened between them. She queries about, their living possessions, their furniture, the stuff that they have. And he tells her that he's going to be putting it in storage with a friend. But we know Frank, right? We know that we can't trust anything he says. As soon as Alice leaves, he sells the furniture. A few weeks later, I'm going to assume that in the timeline, this is sometime after Frank left, she goes back to Spanish Town trying to find her furniture. And the address that Frank gave her is for a cemetery. So literally, it's almost as if there's no connection to Frank whatsoever. The years pass, 7 years, and no word from Frank. So you can imagine Alice's dilemma. She has no address to write to. Cell phones maybe weren't a thing back then, so she has no phone to call. She doesn't know what's going on with him. She's just back in the country. Frank is gone. That's it. 7 years and no word from Frank. We're going to assume that Frank is maybe somewhere in his 20s by now. definitely late 20s, heading into 30s, that sort of a thing. One evening in June, a taxi comes to the village. So we are seeing between the beginning of the book and coming up to present in chapter 9 that some things have changed, because taxis were not a common thing back when Frank was a child. But a taxi comes to the village and it stops at Mr. Grant's gate. And the person who gets out is very expensively dressed. If you have a copy of the text, I'm going to assume that the picture on the front is how this visitor to the village looked when they got out of the taxi. And the visitor, of course, was Frank. No surprises there. When he gets to walking around the village, he gives away a lot of stuff, you know. Think about someone who migrates or goes away to foreign, as we call it in Jamaica, especially from a small community, a rural community. When they come back, they have to be giving stuff away, you know, give away the new crepe on them foot, give away a chaparita, give away a shirt, a pants, something like that. He's giving away a lot of stuff, to the point where his father says to him, you can't give away so many things, you're gonna have nothing left. So he gives away a lot of stuff. He finds out that Deacon Collins has died and Alice has moved out of the community. So this definitely signals that there is definitely now no connection between Frank and Alice anymore. Let's keep it going. He meets up with his friends at the bar for a drink, and Frank, having money now, he is the one that's treating everyone to a drink. And we have quite a list of characters. We'll see them when we get to the other elements. Quite a list of characters who have turned up at the bar for this free drink. One of the drinkers is Sylvester, and he tries to ingratiate. He tries to get into Frank's space by telling him, you know, that he is related to him in some way, form, or shape. But all of that is because he wants to try and get some money out of Frank. Frank realizes that it's becoming a habit where every day Sylvester wants to come and sing for him, and at the end of it, Frank gives him a little small change. But Frank realizes what's going on, and he soon puts a stop to it. At the last interaction that they were having, where Frank was really getting upset and telling Sylvester, don't bother come back around, he has an idea, and he decides that he's going to enlist Sylvester's help to throw a surprise party for his father. He's going to be turning 70, and so he's planning to throw him a surprise party. So he makes the plans with Sylvester, tells him what to do, what to get, all the animals that are going to be killed and used in the cooking and the eating and all of that. And he gives him some money to carry out this plan. The party day rolls around, everything is in place. One of Mr. Grant's friends was used to kind of delay him or keep him away from the home, so that when he gets home, it's going to be a big surprise to see all of these people there. So the surprise goes on, but Frank's father is not as receptive to it as they thought he would have been, and he goes inside and he's quite upset about all of these people in his yard. King Mavrodos comes along and he makes his comments as well, and that just upsets Mr. Grant even more. Mr. Grant leaves the yard actually angrily. Now, can you imagine you're the guest of honor at a surprise party and you don't want it? You leave the yard completely. That's going to put a bit of a damper on things. Persons, of course, the guests are trying to convince him to stay, but the more they try to convince him, the angrier he gets. So eventually, the party breaks up because the entire mood has changed. When the yard is empty is when he comes back home, and Frank is pretty embarrassed at the end of it all because his plan was a big flop. Now, what do we see happening in terms of our characters? We have, as I said, we have quite a list. So we have Frank and Tobal at the beginning of the chapter, Alice as well, Deacon Collins. Deacon Collins had a conversation with Alice regarding forgetting about Frank, etc. Mr. Grant. Then we have all of these characters who are poor named. among those who came to get the free drink with Frank. Mr. Williams is the shopkeeper, and we have the villagers, and we have King Myrodas. Our setting is Spanish Town and Jimmy Peace, and the period of time is 7 years. I did not mention Cayman because we did not see any scenes in Cayman playing out in the story or in the chapter. And our themes, family and friendship. A couple questions that we want to consider. Not many, but more I'm trying to get you to think a little bit, so critical thinking questions, so to speak. So did you think about it when you were reading this part of the chapter and Frank was making all of his plans? Did you at any point think that he would have come back to Alice when he made her those promises? And I want you to think about the Frank Grant that you know, in terms of the character that you would have known for 8 chapters. Can Frank's word be trusted, do you think? And if you think he would have come back, why? If you don't think he would have come back, why not? What do you think of the villagers' reaction to Frank's prosperity? When they see this lavishly dressed gentleman walking through, what was their reaction? Not just what was their reaction, but what do you think of their reaction? What reason do you think why do you think they were reacting the way they were? That's really what I'm trying to get at. Right? And why was Sylvester hanging around Frank so much? I kind of hinted at it, but tell me why you think he was hanging around so much. And I want to add another question. Do you know anyone who behaves like a Sylvester in your space? In your friends circle, in your class? If you identify what Sylvester's motive was in hanging around Frank so much, do you have someone who behaves like a Sylvester? And what do you think Frank felt? What was he feeling, internally about his father's reaction to the surprise party? And think about it. If you were in Frank's shoes, how would you feel about how the honored guest responded to this lavish party that you threw for them? How would you feel? So, as per usual, happy reading.